I hope this isn't a bad word, but how does Eberron tie into Dungeons and Dragons? What is that?
It's a setting.
Okay.
It's a published setting.
It was actually a fan-made setting that won a contest to become a fully published setting, and it is the express purpose of Eberron is to be a noir-esque setting. It doesn't really.
Say it again.
It's supposed to be noir-esque.
Oh, noir.
Yeah.
Noir-esque.
It doesn't, in my opinion at least, it doesn't really fulfill that purpose, but it's a lot of fun. It's a great setting. I've played in a number of those, in a number of games with that. It's a great setting, and there are other settings. Forgotten Realms is another big popular setting.
Okay.
It's a similar type thing. Eberron changes a lot more with the Warforged, who are a race of living constructs, kind of like robot people.
Golems.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Yeah,
if
but
you play in
they're treated
Eberron,
more like
you
robots.
play in Eberron. Your whole campaign is in Eberron.
It's the
They don't
setting.
really jump back and forth.
Yeah. It's
Well,
the
you
setting.
can jump back and forth, but it takes a very special campaign and a very talented DM to pull that off
Yeah,
well.
keep in mind the fluidity of these games, that you can go anywhere and do
Well, yeah.
anything, hypothetically. Yeah. But that, actually, that's a good point. We can talk about the settings a little bit. And that's kind of complicated a little bit.
Well, who created their own settings and who used the published ones?
About Among Us?
Yeah.
Well, I started using World of Greyhawk when I first started DMing, basically. And which is, those of you familiar with it, it's pretty crazy. And in many ways nonsensical, but it's fun, as a setting. And then, I don't know if I've ever used for D&D itself, I don't think I've ever used a homemade setting. Well, that's not true. I have recently, but pretty much in the old days, it was World of Greyhawk.
I've actually always made my own settings right from the onset, but more recently I pulled bits from the published settings because the published settings are really good, and so pulling elements out of that. Okay, some of the published settings are really good. Some of them are kind of crap, but pulling elements out of that has kind of helped my settings be a little bit more evolved.
Well, there was a company in the mid-'70s whose name I have lost, published their own universes and such. They didn't just do it for D&D, they did it for a lot of other RPGs at the time. I can't remember
You're
the
thinking
name.
of Judges Guild?
Judges Guild, there you go.
Yeah.
Had a whole
They
bunch-
were the very first TSR licensee.
Yeah.
So they got the blessing that a lot of other companies instead got a letter of cease and desist from TSR.
Now, were they the ones that did City State of the Invincible Overlord?
Yes, they were.
Yes.
Okay. Right, which was like another early setting.
Right. I always I created my own setting from the very beginning, especially because there were no published settings back then. And by the time the published settings came out, and I got one of the first copies of the City State of the Invisible Overlord, and I looked at it, and it was very nice, but the best I would have done was I would have planted it somewhere in my setting with my storyline, my kingdom structure, and everything else. And I've been basically using the same world setting for the past 40 years. Now, as time went on and my life changed, and I got married and had a child and had a lot of time restrictions, I started doing things like taking the campaign paths that were being published in Dragon Magazine and literally just using them, just playing them in my existing world. And then, so in a sense, I was using another campaign in my campaign,
Right.
but I always fitted it in.
Well, let's get the same question with these two guys.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with Greyhawk. I mean, I owned it. I know I've read through it. I like the concept of the different modules I had grown to use in there, but kind of like Ted said, it was a little weird, different. It's not really something I liked. I really was mostly focused on just sheer adventure, rather individual adventure rather than a setting. And for that end, I loved the Dragon Magazine. I loved the modules, the way you could really hone in on something. I mean, it really was kind of a precursor for all the later editions that came. So mine were really more individual adventures, but I did do a lot of design of my own modules rather than settings, and I did run 2 or 3. And the most fun part was just, designing them and trying to top what you read, top what other people had done.
So, Steve, how have you used settings?
If I want to use a world, I'll probably use Eberron because it's the most complete and it's high quality. A lot of the the Dungeon Magazine quality kind of went up and down, and it's kind of piecemeal, and a lot of times they don't fit together very well. Eberron did, and it's a huge time saver. The thing I don't like about it is if your players get a hold of it, then they can get knowledge that they shouldn't have. So it's, there's pros and cons.
Yeah, that's true. So another aspect we could talk about is, so Dungeons and Dragons, various versions, a lot of people play the game. How is this spread out in other ways? There was a Saturday morning cartoon in the 80s called Dungeons and Dragons. It was kind of...
Which I gotta say, the coolest thing about it is when they did come out with the box set. They came out with a box set that looked like the red box set for D&D, and actually came with a manual, 3rd edition style, but of all the characters with stats and things
Really?
like that. It was actually great.
When was that?
When did the DVDs come out? Probably 07, 08?
Oh, really? Wow. Okay.
I'll show it to you. I've got it.
But-
I mean, they're fun. I remember watching it at the time and going, oh my god, I can't believe it is.
It's like, I had the first,
But if you accept it on its own terms,
right,
it's not
at
that
one time
bad.
I had the first set of Dungeon and Dragon action figures. This was before the cartoon.
Yeah.
Okay. What were the action figures before the cartoon?
They were just from the game. It was like a generic magic user and like that. It wasn't a specific character.
Gotcha. And then, so other than the cartoon, which a lot of you remember, so I'm not sure exactly when. I'm thinking this is maybe 89 or 88 or something like that. Gygax wrote a book about this character. And so I don't know if TSR are publishing them themselves or worked with another publisher, but they started publishing books essentially based on D&D. And Gord, I thought it was called Gord the Thief originally. May have been Gord the Rogue. So they kind of expanded that way. And then much later, there was actually a D&D movie, Dungeons and Dragons. And then there was, we'll talk about that.
Was
then-
Tom Baker in it?
Was he in it?
No. I think the Dragonlance one was first. Then the one that you're talking about.
Okay. There was a Dragonlance movie?
The Dragonlance, yes, the Dragonlance movie.
I don't even
It
know.
was,
about
it was an
that.
animated feature.
Oh, animated.
I think
Yeah, okay.
I
did
don't know
see
if that was before or after the D&D movie, but you're right, there was an animated.
And recently, though, there's a, I think this is a British production, Dungeons and Dragons, what is it called? The book. The Book of Vile Darkness. Dungeons and Dragons, The Book of Vile Darkness. Now, I'm pretty sure it's a British production, but those are movies that are essentially based on D&D.
The first quote unquote D&D based novel that came out was a book called Quiet Keep.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
All the main characters had a bracelet, which had the dice on it that would spin whenever they came up to a problem.
Right.
That's cute.
Yeah, by Andre Norton.
Yes.
I had that some years ago, and it's hard to read, or it was hard to read for me. I didn't like it.
I still got one. I still have my copy.
But then I totally forgot about that.
Never did the sequel.
I mean, there's also, of course, the since we brought up the books, the R.A. Salvatore books, since he wrote a ton of them, and they were actually pretty influential because there was some rules text that came along after them.
Really?
It was actually particularly a lot of the stuff when they brought back Forgotten Realms in 4th edition.
Now, everybody knows what he's talking about? Can somebody pronounce the name?
Drizzt.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just say Drizzt.
Right.
We can just call him D-Man here.
Right. So that was. Am I right? That was supposed to be in the Forgotten Realms.
Yes, that is in Forgotten Realms. The books actually have Forgotten
Okay.
Realms logo printed on them.
But clearly that was very popular, and apparently the angsty dark elf with 2 scimitars is a big thing.
Oh my goodness.
How about the Choose Your Own Adventure books?
I forgot about those. Choose your own adventure
There were
books.
those.
I loved those when I was a child.
Yeah.
I had one. I actually had
How many
one
people
as
would
a kid.
cheat and then get to a place and then to go to all the different pages
Actually,
to see what would happen.
I had one of the D&D ones as a kid, and I didn't know until like 2 years ago. I went back in my old room in my parents' house and found it on a bookshelf and looked at it and realized it was a D&D book. It was one of the D&D Choose Your Own Adventure books. Because I had no idea as a kid. I had never heard of D&D. Actually, I just realized I kind of lied earlier. My first experience with D&D was actually not when we played. My first experience with D&D was not with the game itself. It was in a game shop. It was in a game shop. And I was in elementary school at the time. I was a very small child. I was looking through stuff, and I saw a D&D book, and I had never heard of any of the stuff, no idea what it was. And the guy behind the counter warned my mother not to let me get that book.
Wow.
Because according to him, he had seen too many people lose too much time to that game or something like that.
Well, okay, that's a legitimate complaint.
And
that is
always
a
has
legitimate
been.
concern.
Seems like she lost that battle card.
Right. But speaking of complaints,
years later.
everybody knows about the satanic panics of the 80s and all that.
Oh,
We know
yeah.
that D&D was a big target amongst many other things, of course. And you know about an organization called Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons, BAD, all that kind of. Nobody's unfamiliar with this, right?
Yeah. We ran into, I actually ran into protesters when we go to the local game store.
At protesters at a game store?
Yeah.
That I've never seen. My
From the
experience.
local Baptist church.
Well, around the time when I was first getting involved, I was in a hobby shop, and there was in one of the glass counters there was one of the white books, Eldritch Sorcery or no, Eldritch
Wizardry.
which shows like a half-naked woman about to be sacrificed on an altar.
Yeah.
Basically, and so these ladies right next to me said something like, "Oh, don't tell me that's not witchcraft." And so clearly they had bought into it based
Yeah,
on.
we had picketers.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
There
What
were also-
was funny was the same group. Just as a side note, it didn't have anything to do with D&D, but other than the common group. When Monty Python's Life of Brian came out, they were picketing. But the adults couldn't do it because they had to go to work. So they were pulling the kids out of the church school during the day to picket. And I remember one time I ran into one of the adults and said, "Well, have you ever seen the movie?" Because their comment was, "Well, this guy makes himself out to be Christ." And I said, "Have you ever seen the movie?" "No, the preacher has." And he said,
Yes.
"No, because Brian," and you're going to go, "No, dummy, Brian in the movie spends the entire movie saying he's not Christ."
Right. Well, yeah, that's the mindset.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah,
It was.
unfortunately,
I remember
this
it's the Rock Church in Norfolk, Virginia.
that there were a lot of people that formed their opinions based solely on the opinions of people that were in authority and they trusted.
Of course,
And
same
that's-
thing.
And
The media.
So we have a gentleman back here.
There was actually a case in the 80s where a lady taught that under hypnosis had disclosed a great deal of satanic cults and that she had been impregnated dozens of times by her father. It was all later turned out to be hocus. This is where the X-Files and all these other things were based off that particular case. And in the early 80s, you had a lot of psychiatrists, psychologists, and law enforcement officers doing the traveling science show, teaching classes to groups, church groups, and to law enforcement groups, even at the FBI Academy, about this, and D&D was one of their main topics.
Yeah.
One of their main, they had books they could show.
Yeah.
And you had people who got tremendous amounts of training on that because it was a teaching topic.
Right. No, right. Yeah.
It's all hocus, but it's still,
Yeah.
there's still
Amazes
a
the
lot
monsters
of
movie
fervor
didn't
about it.
help.
Right. Yeah. No, that's true. There are police manuals
Yep.
that talk about it.
Oh, you parked out in front of the store and the chick publishing tracks.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
By the way, they're
I heard that somebody actually wrote to Jack Chick and told him that D&D wasn't like that, and he responded and basically said, "Oh," and he stopped producing that pamphlet.
no, it's not true.
That's
No.
not true.
But
I actually
what's
did.
interesting is that there's some people currently, or maybe they just didn't finish it. They're making a movie based on that pamphlet,
Yeah.
and they're doing it exactly the way the pamphlet does.
Yeah.
But they're basically doing it as satire.
Yeah.
But they're being true to the pamphlet and doing it. They're,
We have about 4 minutes left.
No,